Finnegan, have you checked this lens cap? Here we are at the end of this module, and it's time to look at why, drumroll please, the GH5 is the best camera when it comes to shooting anamorphic on a budget. At least right now. Whoops! We recorded this before the release of the GH5 Mark II, so this video will feature brief interruptions like this one to address any changes. The changes are minor, and I still stand by my choice of the GH5, now with the GH5 Mark II coming close second. To make my choice clear, we'll go over its features in the same order we looked at things in this module. Starting with anamorphic modes, then frame guides. We'll talk about its sensor size and the effects of using a focal reducer. We'll look at why MFT is a great option for a native mount. And last, talk about in-camera desqueeze options. In case you want to go more in-depth into any of these topics, you should really watch the videos that came before this one, as they cover each subject on its own, regardless of gear specifics. If you're already a member of the channel, you're my hero. If you're not, then you're missing out, as members have had several weeks of heads up to watch this and all other cookbook videos. Click the join button below the video to learn about all the other perks and become a part of the crew. The GH5. How come I'm choosing a camera that's almost 4 years old as the king of the hill when we had so many other great options come to the market? To be honest, the GH5 kind of has all the right perks for anamorphic shooting without the fanfare of a brand new model. It's been established and tested, plus upgraded through various firmware updates. Even then, why not the GH5S or the BGH1 that are newer and improved? In terms of versatility, those cameras are indeed stronger than the GH5. But on the anamorphic on a budget scale, their features don't add to what we need. And some of the upgrades even subtract parts of the original functionalities in the GH5. A lot of reasons used to choose the GH5 also apply to the GH5S and BGH1, including its anamorphic mode that makes better use of the sensor than the standard video mode, giving you more height instead of cropping the sides. We'll get to the sensor size specifics in a little bit. Besides the anamorphic mode, you also get some pretty strong files for post-production, being able to record in H.265, 422, 10-bit color, and intra-frame compression, or all-I, at 24 and 30p, with a bitrate of 400 megabits per second, which is pretty intense compared to many other cameras in the same bracket or even above. You can even do 60p anamorphic by downgrading your color to 8-bit. The edge for the GH5 over the BGH1 and GH5S is that while those two cameras share the same sensor, which performs better at low light and offers dual ISO, the GH5 has smaller photo sites, which result in more pixels overall. All of this translates into the 6K open gate recording mode with 4992 by 3744 pixels, so more like 5K, versus the max resolution of 3328 by 2496 that you can get on the BGH1 and GH5S. This is the main difference among these cameras, and if resolution is not a key for you, then the GH5 could not be the top choice, but one of the other two. In case you're not familiar with the difference between 8 and 10-bit files, the more bits you have, the more color information you are recording. The differences can be subtle on the raw footage, but 8-bit footage breaks really easily in grading, while 10-bit will give you lots more range. Raw recording, for example, offers between 12 and 16 bits, which is even more information for post. I like Panasonic's combination of Cropmarks and in-camera desqueeze because you get to see your framing exactly. I don't know how they do it, but I do know I've seen way more cameras and external monitors that fail at this than ones that work properly. Getting that little spare area on the sides can be key for reframing later on, so the Cropmarks will show your final frame and also your safety area. Now let's look at sensor size, and this is a mathy take on it. The BGH1 have a slightly wider sensor, 19.2mm, the GH5 features a 4x3 sensor with 17.2mm width by 13mm height. It's also reasonably smaller than what I said is the target size of Super 35. But magic happens once you add a focal reducer to the mix. A standard 0.71 times focal reducer will give you a virtual sensor size of 24.22mm width by 18.3mm height. Mere fractions of a millimeter from the Super 35 target of 24.89 by 18.66. It gives you what I consider to be the ideal sensor size out there without rescaling or cropping. Shooting anamorphic on the open gate mode with a focal reducer has the same effect as Hollywood aimed to achieve in terms of maximizing film area out of the Super 35 negative and squeezing awesome cinemascope shots on there. The downside is a focal reducer will change your mount situation, but if you're going for a DIY setup, you're likely to aim for a more popular mount than MFT anyway. The GH5 features a micro four thirds mount. At least 10 times every year, someone comes out with the ultimate proof that the MFT system is dead, or something along those lines. They've been saying this since the mount was created, so I guess it's not too much besides noise at this point. The MFT system keeps going with lots of makers offering new cameras, lenses, and adapters. The MFT mount operates with a very short flange to sensor distance, which means it's very versatile as a mount that can be adapted to other mounts, such as EF and PL, to name the most popular options. It's really hard to find a lens that can't be adapted to MFT. When it comes to anamorphic shooting, the MFT mount provides you with native choices between Sirui and Vazen lenses. These totally skip the process of building a DIY rig and come at very different price points. I've experimented with each lens in those sets, so you can look those reviews up afterwards. Vazen went as far as tailoring their squeeze factor to 1.8 times in order to maximize the usage of the GH5's sensor area. Since we're talking about that, let's jump into desqueezing the picture. The GH5 can also do in-camera desqueeze, although at limited ratios. Due to its old age, it only features support to 1.33 times and 2 times. Personally, this is good enough for me because 1.33 is close enough to 1.5 and 2 times is close enough to 1.8. So I can use all squeeze factors without much of a hassle and dismissing an external monitor. The GH5S and BGH1 actually win this round, with support to 1.3, 1.5, and 1.8 times squeezes besides 1.33 and 2 times. This also applies to all other Panasonic bodies, such as the S series, and I anticipate anything else that'll come later. As a matter of fact, the additional in-camera desqueeze ratios offered by the GH5 Mark II are its biggest advantage over the original GH5. There's no way I can emphasize how much in-camera desqueeze helps you shoot. This comes from shooting with an A7S II for many years, then switching over. It's by far one of my favorite features. There's always more. The GH5 being a camera from 2017 also means it gets discounts frequently. It was $300 off as I was writing this video. And you also find lots of them in the used market. I got mine from a fellow cinematographer here in Vancouver. It's about $400 cheaper than the other two cameras in direct comparison, with the GH5 sitting at $1,600 while the GH5S and BGH1 are around $2,000. The S5 had its round as the GH5 killer, which is not too far from the truth, but the GH5 has several tried and true little things that the S5 lacks, anamorphic sensor area being the key piece of this puzzle. I know a great deal of folks who switched directly from the GH5 to the S5 and are super happy with it. That gives you a full-frame sensor in exchange for some of the GH5's benefits. The last extra bit of bonus on the GH5 and many other Panasonic cameras is in-body image stabilization suited for anamorphic lenses. By the way, the GH5S and BGH1 miss in-body stabilization altogether. Activating the anamorphic stabilization is an advanced move, as setting it wrong will give you poor results. In a very simplistic manner, when you use a default in-body stabilization, the camera is countering your shakiness. It does it on 5 axes. One of those is roll. What happens when you roll the sensor and use an anamorphic lens is you get skewing. It's not always there, but it looks a lot like extra terrible rolling shutter. Oversimplifying, when we use a proper anamorphic adapted in-body stabilization, the sensor is not rolling to compensate for camera shake, which in turn avoids the skewing in the picture. Talking to Matt Fraser at Panasonic, I learned that there's more to it than just turning off the roll axis, but we won't get into it here. Since the GH5 only offers support for 1.33 and 2 times anamorphics, those are the only available stabilization options, directly based on your other settings. All you can do is turn it on or off. But in cameras that support different squeeze factors, such as the S5 or the S1H, you have a custom menu to set the proper squeeze or stabilization for best results. Yep, this also applies to the GH5 Mark II, giving you better odds at handheld anamorphic. I'm not going into the can of worms that is in-body image stabilization on this video, but you will see me take shots at it here and there until we get to its actual video on Module 7. It's a secret art, I swear. The GH5 is my current pick for best budget camera when it comes to anamorphic shooting. You get a proper anamorphic mode and a wild 6K open gate recording mode, framing guides to help you figure out your framing, and the best sensor size to match Super 35 without much math and crop. In front of that, you have a super versatile mount that is the Micro Four Thirds system, allowing you to adapt various lenses without issues. And you get in-camera Desqueeze, which is one of my must-have top features for proper anamorphic shooting. It's also a cheap camera, and it offers anamorphic image stabilization, which no other maker does. It's such a reliable camera, Panasonic hasn't bothered releasing a new model in 4 years. We had 4 years to make this video, yet we finished it a couple of months after the release of the updated GH5 Mark II. Just amazing. And you still get people recommending it and lusting after it. This brings us to the conclusion and almost a review of the 3rd module of the Anamorphic Cookbook. In this module, we talked about all things camera that affect the process of shooting scope. You should definitely watch the other videos as I go into a lot more detail of each particular subject that I did here for the GH5 situation. On the next module, we'll look at spherical lenses, popularly known as taking lenses, and study how they affect the final result of your picture. It's not all about your anamorphic glass when it comes to shooting anamorphic. So subscribe for more anamorphic knowledge and like this video if you own a GH5 or if you're seriously considering one now. The further we move into the future, the more I wonder how long this camera will stay relevant. So update me in the comments as to when you're watching this and if the advantages of the GH5 still overshadow more recent cameras. Last, if you want to be first in line to get original content for the Anamorphic Cookbook and other Anamorphic on a Budget videos, check our memberships. You get early access to content immediately as you sign up, plus you become a part of a growing community of people that are as passionate as you about shooting with these wonderful lenses. We have several tiers, so pick the one that works best for you by clicking the join button below. I'm Tito Ferradangs, and it was a pleasure sharing this time with you. See you soon.